It's true. I don't have OCD anymore. And that's without doing exposures all the time. I haven't had it for more than a year now. In this video, I'm going to talk about why doing exposures continuously to treat your OCD doesn't make sense and what you can do instead to get better. I'm going to break the video down into 3 different parts. 1, why doing exposures doesn't make your OCD fear less scary. 2, what your goal from your OCD treatment should be. And 3, what you can try instead to get better. If you have OCD, you probably tried, or at least heard of, exposure and response prevention, ERP. It's the most common treatment for OCD and the go-to for most therapists, even though the recovery stats for ERP treatment aren't that great. What happens in the treatment is your therapist tells you to do things, exposures, that relate to your OCD fear to make you feel really anxious, but then not do the thing that makes you feel better, your compulsion. So, for example, when I was in therapy, my therapist told me to write down my OCD fears on a piece of paper and put the paper in a drawer. After that, I was supposed to not think about or plan anything related to my OCD fears. I'd had what you'd call pure O OCD, so most of my compulsions were going on in my head. Even if my OCD theme changed over time, it was still mostly mental compulsions that I was fixating on. I went to a lot more sessions, and the exposures got worse and worse, all with the goal of not doing any compulsive thoughts. I was also supposed to do exposures at home as well, multiple times a day. She said basically, the more you do them, the better you'll feel in the long run. The idea is, the more exposures you do, the more you get used to the fears, and you start habituating, or stop caring, as much about the things that you're afraid of because you're thinking about them all the time. That's an interesting idea, but it never worked for me. I did exposures multiple times a day, but I never got used to or comfortable with the idea of my fears happening. They were just as scary. Like I said, most of my compulsions were mental, like planning for the fear happening, planning for things to stop the fear from happening, different scenarios of how the fear could play out, picturing the horrible outcomes of my fears, things like that. That's why I think doing exposures all the time doesn't make your fear any less scary. None of my compulsions got better after doing exposures thousands of times because my life being ruined, which is most of what my fears were related to, could never be something I could get used to or comfortable with. Also, with ERP, doing exposures all the time, day to day, was really taking up a lot of my time. And a big thing I hated about having OCD was how much time I was wasting thinking about it every day. I eventually asked myself, what did I even really want from my OCD treatment? And I realized I wanted to be normal. I wanted to stop having OCD and stop spending so much of my time every day being afraid and thinking about my stupid OCD topics. Didn't seem stupid when I was thinking about them, but that was the whole point. When I calmed down, they always seemed really stupid or absurd. What I mean by normal is normal people don't spend every day having to do exposures to stop thinking about something. If they're afraid of something, they'll think about it for a bit, maybe even plan something to stop it from happening and go through it in some kind of detail, but then they can just let it go and not spend the whole day thinking about it, or the next day, or every day for months. I wanted to get to that. That's what I wanted out of my treatment. And exposures weren't getting me there. I think that was because when ERP was made as a treatment several decades ago, it was designed to treat people who had more obvious symptoms, so physical compulsions, not mental ones. For example, if somebody had contamination OCD, as an exposure they could touch something that might be dirty and then not wash their hands. It's very obvious if they did or didn't wash their hands, so they knew for sure if they did or didn't do the compulsion. But mental compulsions, you're not really that sure. Like, what is or isn't a mental compulsion? It's not obvious. Is thinking about your topic a compulsion? For real event OCD, which I had as well, you can rehearse the memory in your head so many times. Is thinking about the memory a compulsion? And even if it is, how do you stop thinking about it? To go a step further, if you have OCD, you probably did what I did, which is question whether or not you even had OCD. I would ask myself, if the treatment is supposed to work for OCD and it's not working for me, maybe it's not OCD. Maybe I'm just some kind of freak or psychotic or a bad person and actually want these things to happen. Doing exposures all the time, like my therapist told me to do, didn't answer any of these questions. And even when I asked these kinds of questions, it was really just reassurance I got back, saying, no, it's OCD, just follow the process and you'll feel better over time. Before I recovered, I mapped out exactly what I was doing in my head when OCD thoughts would come in. I realized I was already doing exposures every day. If you have OCD, you probably expose yourself to your topic multiple times a day, automatically. That's what OCD is. It's part of your disorder. ERP treatment directs you to do more exposures all the time, which would just lead you to take more time out of your day unnecessarily. Use the exposures you already have to deal with your OCD. Don't force new exposures to prompt your OCD if it's happening anyway. Anybody who doesn't have OCD isn't spending hours a day exposing themselves to their fears. If you have to do exposures all the time, and you have to continuously do exposures as part of your life, then you're stepping away from what would be normal behavior. If your goal is to try to get to normal behavior, like mine was, then constantly bringing up your fears in your head would still be considered not normal. If you ask somebody who doesn't have OCD what they're thinking about, they're almost certainly not going to say, yeah, I'm thinking about my fears right now to expose myself to them so that I don't get afraid of them later on. You're already bringing up your fears every single day in your head while you're ruminating. You don't need to set reminders to keep telling yourself about your fears. You're doing that anyway. Like I said, it's part of your disorder. This is where ERP treatment loses me. When I was doing ERP, the thousands of times I did exposures related to my fear never reduced how afraid I would be if any of those fears actually came true. When I finally realized what I was doing over and over again in my head, I decided to just stop. I talk about exactly what I did in more detail in my End Your OCD guide, but here is a basic summary. I realized that no matter how many times I thought about my OCD topic, it would keep coming back, no matter how much reassurance I felt the last time I thought about it. I also realized that obsessing over my OCD fears took time every day to do. The planning, the reassuring, the checking, the constant rumination all took hours out of my day that I would never get back. At first, it just made me feel worse, realizing that I spent so much of my time on these useless topics and these fears that I couldn't stop thinking about. But it also made me realize that I was aware of them now, which means I could stop. I sat down one day and thought about all the things related to my OCD topic at the time and made a decision that I wasn't going to think about any of them anymore. So every time that a thought came in that was related to that decision, I just didn't interact with it. You really can stop thinking about a topic if you decide to stop engaging with it. Let me be clear, you can't stop the initial thoughts from coming into your head. Don't try. That doesn't work. But you can decide if you're going to keep engaging with them or not. If a thought comes into your head and it's something you don't want to engage with, you don't have to continue that thought. You just can stop. I lay out exactly how to do that step by step in the End Your OCD guide. If you haven't seen it already, you should check it out. If you're still struggling, I also spent about 6 months going through the notes I made during my recovery process to create a course with more detail about each individual step to get better. I recommend taking a look at that as well. You will definitely be getting your money's worth. If you feel like you've done everything you could and you're still struggling, I also offer one-on-one coaching where we can review your situation in detail and find out where you might be going wrong. You have the power to end your OCD forever. I hope this is the last OCD video you watch.